reading from the Gospel of John. Jesus was troubled in spirit and declared, "Very truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he was speaking. One of his disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So while reclining next to Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." So when he had dipped the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. After he received the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "Do quickly what you are going to do." Now no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the common purse, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the festival," or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the piece of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him." Judas goes out into the night. It seems a very, very bleak scene. A bleak scene to which perhaps we can relate, for it feels like we are living through a very long night. This pandemic has stretched on already several weeks, and there are plenty of signs that there may be weeks more of isolation, of sickness, of anxiety, of loneliness, and indeed of death. Judas goes out to betray Jesus, something which, it is plain from that reading, could have happened with any of the disciples. They all ask, "Is it I?" They're not sure who it could be. It could be any of them. When we look in the mirror, sometimes perhaps we feel that we betray Jesus by our actions, by our words, and by our thoughts. It all seems very bleak. But as Judas goes into the night, and that's a point which John the Evangelist makes very clearly and specifically, he makes a second point straight afterwards. "Now," says Jesus, "now the Son of Man is glorified, and God will be glorified in him." Despite the darkness, glory will be present. In the darkness of Christmas night, 33 years previously, Jesus is born in a stable in an impoverished scene in Bethlehem. On Good Friday, we are told that in the middle of the day, it is dark for 3 hours as Jesus dies, and it is in the darkness of a sealed tomb in the hours before the first rays of dawn that Jesus will rise. God is present and active even in the darkness. And alongside the sickness, the anxiety, the suffering, the loneliness, and the death, we have also seen God glorified in some astonishing actions by our fellow human beings. Actions of heroism, of compassion, actions of love. We see that in the healthcare workers, other first responders, and ever so many people working to try and keep society functioning. God will be glorified. God will overcome the darkness. God will overcome the darkness of this pandemic. God will overcome the darkness of our own sinfulness. Judas goes out into the night, and God is glorified. And later this week, we will behold God at his most glorified, when arms outstretched, Jesus will say, "It is finished." Not, "It is written off, it is ruined, the end has come." "It is finished" for St. John means it is complete and perfected. God is glorified on the cross, and if we have any doubts about what that might mean, God is glorified on Easter Sunday morning when Christ is risen from the tomb. Despite this pandemic, I believe we see signs of God's glory all around us, even through this long night. Amen.